What would you do if the freezing wind of the Arizona territory cut through your very bones and survival meant carrying 2 children who weren't even your own? What if the wagon wheel splintered, supplies ran dry, and a stranger rode out of the snow with nothing but a quiet gaze and a single gold ring offering safety, a future, and a kind of love you'd long since given up on? Would you trust him? Would you take the ring? Or would you walk away, not knowing if hope would ever find you again? Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget. The cold had been my constant companion for weeks, a bone-deep ache that even the heavy woolen coat I wore couldn't quite banish. It was late December in the Arizona territory, and the mountains were a ghostly landscape of white. The gunfire had stopped echoing long before the silence settled in, and my lungs burned from the exertion of it all. I stood with my back against the splintered wood of our wagon wheel, my rifle barrel still smoking faintly the heat, a fleeting comfort against the biting air. My breath plumed out in ragged clouds. 2 small figures clung to my skirt, their tiny hands clutching the rough fabric as if I were a lifeline. Cora was 7, and her brother Leo just 5. They were not mine, not by blood, but their mother Alara had bled out in my arms 3 weeks ago, and ever since they hadn't left my side. The man who had tried to take what was left of our meager supplies lay face down in the snow, a dark stain spreading around him. My hands were still shaking as I listened for the sound of hooves. The world felt too quiet. A soft, muffled crunch of snow was the only warning. I swung the rifle up again, my jaw so tight it ached. Easy, a voice called out, smooth and low like aged whiskey. That barrel's hot enough to melt the snow. You shoot me, you'll just have to do it again when I come back to haunt you. A man rode into view, his silhouette tall in the saddle, a battered shearling jacket pulled tight against the cold. His horse was lathered and breathing hard steam rising from its nostrils. I narrowed my eyes, suspicion a shield I had learned to carry well. Who are you? My voice was raspy from the cold. He dismounted in one slow, fluid motion. Named Silas Jarrow. Saw the smoke from the ridge. Thought you might need help. I handled it, I said, though I could feel the strength draining from my knees. Silas's gaze flicked to the children, then back to me. Looks like you did. Cora stared up at him with wide, solemn eyes. Leo clung to me, silent. Silas knelt to their level, the worn leather of his boots creaking softly. You two all right? He asked, his voice gentle. Cora nodded, her chin tucked into her collar. That man tried to take Mama's horse. My own voice cracked as I spoke the words, a raw wound in the cold air. Their mom, she's gone. Been gone. Silas stood, his gaze meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He didn't offer empty condolences. He just met my eyes, a silent question passing between us. You traveling alone? I was with a wagon train, I said, a bitter sigh escaping my lips. We got separated in a blizzard near Big Dry Wash. Then the sickness took their ma. I buried her 2 days ago. I looked at the tiny grave marked with a cairn of stones a few feet away. His jaw tightened. That's a hard road. I turned away, pulling the children closer. We'll be fine. Silas walked to the wagon and inspected the broken wheel, his gloved hand brushing the splintered wood. Not with that you won't. Nearest town's a day's ride, and this wheel won't make it past sundown. I will figure it out, I said, the words sharper than I intended. You don't know me. No, he said, pulling off his gloves, his movements deliberate. But I know that look. I've seen people walk into a blizzard with less hope than that. None of them made it through. I looked at him, then truly looked. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but not cruel. His eyes were the color of river stones, gray-blue and steady. He had a revolver at his hip, and a calmness that could settle a storm. You a lawman? I asked. No, ma'am. Just a cowboy headed back from Fort Verde. Got a parcel of land near Bitter Creek. Been running cattle with my brother until he up and married and moved east. I hesitated, then nodded once. All right. Help me get the children to shelter and I'll pay you when I can. He gave a quiet huff of breath. I'm not asking for money. You think I'll just let a man do me favors for nothing? The words came out in a rush, a mix of pride and fierce independence. No, he said, stepping closer, his voice soft. I think you're used to people letting you down. That's different. I swallowed hard, the bitterness of that truth a lump in my throat. You're still a stranger. Silas's voice was softer still. So is everyone. Until they're not. That night, Silas set up camp beside the wagon. He gave the children dried apples from his saddlebag and let them pet his horse Buster. Cora smiled for the first time in days. Leo fell asleep curled beside me, his thumb in his mouth. I sat on a rock, my arms folded, watching Silas fix coffee over a small fire. The cold was less menacing with him there. He spoke quietly, his words a gentle stream of information. Land's about 30 acres southeast of Bitter Creek. Good grazing. I built a small cabin. Nothing fancy, but it stands. I looked out at the stars, a million distant flames in the vast empty sky. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The admission was raw, stripped of the bravado I had carried for so long. He glanced at me, his eyes gentle. You're doing it. One day at a time. I turned to him, my eyes shining with quiet grief. They're not mine. I don't know how to raise them. I was a seamstress in Prescott before everything fell apart. I have nothing left. Silas set the coffee pot aside and walked over, kneeling in front of me. They think you're theirs. That counts for something. I looked down. You don't know what you're getting into. He reached into his fur coat pocket, pulled something small and wrapped in cloth. Maybe I do. I frowned, my curiosity overpowering my fear. What is that? He unwrapped it. A simple gold ring, dulled with age but whole. My mother gave it to me before she passed. Said I would know when to give it to someone. I stared at it, stunned into silence. He looked into my eyes and his voice was steady, a clear pronouncement in the cold night. You're not mine, he said. Not yet. But I've got a ring if you'll take it. My breath caught in my chest. I froze. Silas stood, not pushing, just waiting. Cora stirred in her sleep. I looked at the ring, then at the children, then at the man who had ridden in out of nowhere and offered me something I hadn't dared to want: safety. A future. You're serious, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Dead serious. I stood slowly. I don't even know you. Then let me change that. I looked down at the ring in his hand, and for the first time in weeks, hope stirred in my chest like a fragile flame catching the wind. The morning broke pale and cold, a thin layer of hoarfrost covering everything. I crouched beside the embers, coaxing them back to life with careful breaths. Leo stirred beneath the wool blanket Silas had given me. He'd only had one, and he'd slept without complaint on the hard dirt beside his horse. I hadn't touched the ring. It sat on a flat stone near the fire, still wrapped in the small blue square of cloth. Not hidden, but not accepted either. Silas returned from the creek with a tin pail of water, his boots wet to the ankle. Found a spring past the bluff, clean cold. You want to wash up? I nodded, wiping my hands on my skirt. The children first. He passed me the pail, then crouched to check the saddle cinch. His coat was slung over a fence post he'd hammered into the ground last night. I saw the edge of a torn letter sticking out of his pocket, but didn't ask. Cora blinked from the wagon bed. Miss Eleanor, is that man still here? Silas tipped his fur hat to her. Still here, little one. She studied him with a solemn expression. You got a dog. Silas chuckled, a low rumbling sound that seemed to warm the air. Not anymore. Had one name, was Dipper. He followed my brother everywhere till a rattler got him. Leo's sleepy voice came muffled under the blanket. Was he soft? Soft as cotton, Silas said, but stubborn. I watched the exchange, my brow furrowed. Silas hadn't tried to charm me, but he'd spoken to the children like they were worth listening to. That mattered more than any grand gesture. Once the fire caught again, I poured the water into a pan and scrubbed the children's faces. Cora hissed when the cold water touched her skin, but I murmured to her, my voice gentle. I didn't glance at the man still working near the wagon. Later, as the sun climbed higher, casting a faint pale light on the snowy ground, Silas rolled up the sleeves of his flannel shirt and inspected the broken wheel again. Spoke too soon last night. The axles split clean through. You'd need a replacement, not just a fix. I stood behind him, my arms crossed against the cold. We can't carry everything on horseback. No, he agreed. But we can carry enough. What matters? I hesitated, my eyes moving over the wagon's contents, spools of thread, a hand mirror, the worn quilt that had belonged to Alara, a sack of flour with weevils in it. We don't have a pack saddle. Got a spare tarp, he said. We'll wrap what we can. Tie it to the saddle horn and behind mine. Buster's strong. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the ring and held it in my palm, weighing nothing and everything. You keeping that out to bother me? Silas didn't look at me. No, ma'am. Just figured it should be where you could see it. You always carry around a ring you haven't given to anyone. Just that one, he said. Didn't used to think I'd offer it at all. My voice quieted. What changed? He said simply, you. I looked away, the wind lifting strands of my hair. You're not the sort I expected. Silas ran a palm over the rough edge of the wheel. That good or bad? Still deciding. We left the wagon behind by midday, a lonely, broken sentinel on the cold landscape. Silas led Buster and I walked beside him. Cora clinging to my hand, Leo dozing in the sling I'd tied across my back. The trail sloped west through frozen brush and juniper toward the land Silas had mentioned. We didn't speak much. The cold grew steady, but the silence between us was companionable, a quiet space that felt safe. When the children grew tired, Silas lifted Cora to the saddle without asking, steadying her with one hand. I watched the gesture, my heart a little softer than it had been a moment before. He seemed to know what we needed before we did. As the sun dropped low, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and pale orange, we reached a rise where the land folded into a shallow basin. A small cabin sat at the far end, smoke curling faintly from the stone chimney. A lean-to for livestock stood beside it, half covered in canvas. Silas stopped, his thumb hooked on his belt. That's it. I exhaled a long, tired sigh. You said you built it. Cut the timber myself, he said, pride quiet in his voice. Took 2 winters. I nodded once, taking in the sight. It's plain. He glanced at me, a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. So am I. I almost smiled back. We reached the door just as the last light faded. Inside it smelled of cedar and clean earth. A stone hearth, a table with only one chair, a narrow bed tucked under the window. No clutter, no lace, just the life of a man who'd expected to live it alone. Silas set down the bundles and looked to me. You'll have the bed. I'll take the floor. I'm not helpless, I said, a familiar retort. No, he said, his gaze steady. But you're tired. I didn't argue. While I settled the children onto the mattress, Silas lit the lamp with a match that flared gold against the dim. He opened a tin of beans, heated them on the hearth, and passed me a clean spoon. I took it, my voice low. Why'd your brother leave? Silas leaned against the wall. His wife had kin back in Missouri. Her father took ill. They packed up last spring. You didn't go with them? He shook his head. Didn't belong there. Never have. I watched him. And you think you belong here? I think I'd like to. He didn't press. Didn't ask me again about the ring. But as I tucked the children beneath the quilt and settled down with my back to the door, I saw him watching the fire, his eyes distant. In the quiet, I whispered, I haven't said yes, I know, but I haven't said no. He looked over, and for the first time since I met him, he smiled. Not triumphant, not expectant, just quiet. That's enough for now, he said. The first hard frost came 2 mornings later, a thick white blanket on the porch rails. I stepped outside with a bucket in one hand, my shawl wrapped tight, steam rising from the tin cup of coffee he had left by the door. Silas was already in the field splitting wood near the edge of the cottonwoods, steady and silent. Each strike of the axe echoed through the bare trees, a rhythmic beat against the stillness of the winter air. Cora and Leo were inside, still tangled in quilts, their breath fogging the window pane. I watched him for a long while before crossing the frozen yard. I didn't announce myself. He heard my approach and paused, the axe resting against his broad shoulder. You work early, I said. Chop while the ground's hard, he replied. Keeps the blade true. I tucked a strand of hair under my scarf. I can help. I know you can, Silas said. But I'd rather your hands stay warm. I folded my arms, a familiar defiance rising in my chest. I'm not looking to be kept. I'm not looking to keep you, he said. I'm just looking. I looked down at the frost-covered grass. Leo's fever broke last night. He nodded. Good. He's a tough one. My eyes lifted again. You always this quiet? No, he said, a faint smile on his lips. Just careful with what I say. I studied him. You said your mother gave you that ring. What about your father? Silas set the axe down against the stump. He left before I could remember him. My brother says he drank and rode off. Never sent word after. You ever look for him? Silas shook his head once. Didn't see the sense in chasing a man who didn't want to be caught. I nodded slowly. I remember mine. He smoked a pipe that smelled like pine. Said my name like it was something fine. Silas's voice was quiet. What happened? The sickness took him and my older brother the same winter. I was 16. Never saw spring the same after that. He didn't speak right away. The wind stirred between us, lifting the scent of sap and cold iron from the chopped wood. You want to leave, he said finally. I looked at him, startled. Why would you say that? You walk like someone still waiting on something else. My jaw tightened. It was true in a way. I still carried the ghost of the life I had lost. I don't want to owe anyone. You don't. Not me. Not the land. Not the children. I looked away, the words a fresh wound. They're not mine. They are now, he said. They look to you. That's all it takes. I moved to the pile of wood, crouching to gather a few pieces. My hands were red from the cold, but I didn't flinch. You don't ask much. I ask everything, he said. Just don't say it all at once. I rose slowly, my arms full. And if I walk away, Silas leaned against the stump, his expression unreadable. Then I'll keep the fire going in case you walk back. I held his gaze, something in my chest shifting, a hard knot finally beginning to loosen. Later that day, while Leo napped and Cora helped me mend a tear in my apron, Silas rode out toward the basin's edge. There was a neighbor a few miles off, an older widow named Mrs. Doran, who kept goats and sometimes traded eggs for leatherwork. He returned near dusk with a sack of potatoes and a spool of thread. He left it outside the door with a note scratched on the back of a feed ledger. I found it after tucking the children in. I stood in the doorway reading it by the light of the moon. He had written, "Don't go. We're just getting started." I folded the paper, then walked out into the yard where Silas had settled on a bench beneath the bare-limbed cottonwood. He didn't rise when I approached. "You got hard handwriting," I said. "Didn't plan on anyone reading it but me." I held out the folded note. I meant it. He took it and tucked it back into his pocket. The silence stretched, not tense but full. "I don't know how to be somebody's wife," I said at last, the words a confession. "I only ever learned how to survive." Silas looked up at the stars, a cold, indifferent blanket across the sky. "You think marriage is something different?" I turned my face toward him. "Isn't it?" He paused, then said, "Maybe, but I figure it's mostly the same. You get up, tend what needs tending. Try not to go to bed angry. Keep the roof mended." I gave a soft sound close to laughter. "That's a plain kind of love. It's the kind that lasts," he said. I pulled the ring from my apron pocket. The cloth was gone. It gleamed faintly in the dark. "I don't want promises you can't keep," I said. "I won't give those." I held it out but didn't place it in his hand. Then put it on me. He did, his fingers warm against mine, the band sliding into place like it had been waiting for me all along. "All right then," I said. Silas looked at me, and for the first time my face softened into something unguarded. "You're mine now," he said, his voice low and sure. I leaned against him, my eyes closed. I always was, just didn't know it yet. And in the dark, beneath a sky wide enough to carry all our old griefs, we sat together warm against the cold, already becoming something new. The first snow of November came early, a thick swirling blanket that covered the land. It swept down from the high ridges, stirring the dry leaves that clung to the cottonwoods, and rattling the roof shingles above the cabin bedroom where Cora and Leo slept side by side, their warm breath fogging the glass. Silas stood by the fence line with a spool of wire tucked under one arm and a hammer in his grip. He'd started building the corral that morning, measuring each post twice, sinking them deep, so the soil shift wouldn't take them come spring. I watched from the porch, a basket in my lap, mending one of Leo's flannel shirts that had lost a button elbow deep in the frozen brush 2 days before. "You ever think about putting cattle in that field?" I called across the yard, the wind carrying my voice, a newfound lightness in the sound. Silas raised his head just enough to meet my gaze. "Thought about it, but fence comes first. Otherwise they'll wander off like they got someplace better to be." I smoothed the fabric in my hands, eyes steady. "You always build things slow, only things I want to last." He went back to his work, and I let the words settle in my heart. He wasn't just building a fence, he was building a home. By afternoon I joined him. He'd set aside the hammer and was working with a handsaw, now squaring off a gate post. I brought a tin cup of water, not because he'd asked, but because he hadn't. "You ever worked a fence before?" he asked. I set the cup down on a stump. "No, but I've torn one down." His brows lifted, amused. "That's so. My neighbor back in Prescott put one too close to my clothesline." I told him twice. Third time I took it out with a crowbar. Silas chuckled low and easy. "Remind me not to cross you. You wouldn't forget." We worked in tandem for a while, not speaking. The rhythm of the saw and the creak of wood filled the space between us. When we paused to rest, I leaned against the fence rail and looked out toward the horizon where the land sloped toward Bitter Creek. "You ever think of heading east?" Silas tipped his fur hat back. "Had a chance. Didn't take it." "Why not?" He glanced at me. "Too many people talking fast and saying little. I like slow things, quiet things." "You think I'm quiet?" "No," he said, "but you don't waste words." "That's different." I looked down at my boots, scuffed and dust-covered from the long journey. "I used to talk plenty when I was younger. Thought it made me interesting." He shifted, resting his boot on a stone. "What changed?" "Too many folks listening only long enough to find something to hold against you." Silas nodded. "I understand that." The sun dipped lower. A hawk crossed the sky overhead, its shadow passing over the field. Cora's laughter drifted from the cabin, followed by Leo's quick footsteps. I pushed off the fence. They'll be hungry soon. Silas watched me start toward the house. I found something, he said. I turned. What? Behind the woodpile. Small leather satchel. Worn but stitched up decent. My brother must have left it before he went. I furrowed my brow. What's in it? Ledger pages. A compass. Couple of coins. Nothing useful, but I thought I'd give it to Leo. Might be something for him to press into. I stepped closer, my arms crossed. Why him? Boy's got a mind for where things are. Always watching, careful but not fearful. Reminds me of someone. I tilted my head. Who? Silas's voice was gentle. You. I looked down, then back up at him. You're trying to make a family out of nothing. No, he said. I'm trying to build something out of what's here. I let that settle. There was no pressure in his words, no expectation, just the plain truth of it. That night, after the children had eaten and fallen asleep near the hearth, I sat at the table sorting through a spool box I'd nearly forgotten I had. Silas came in from the barn, the cold clinging to him like a second coat. He brought me a folded scrap of oilcloth. Found this in the loft with the satchel. Might be yours. I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, sepia-toned, its edges curling. It showed a man and a woman seated stiffly, their hands barely touching. The woman's dress was fine, her face unsmiling, but something in the angle of her head reminded me of my mother. My voice caught in my throat. Where was it? Wrapped in a feed sack. Might have fallen from your things when we packed out. I traced the woman's face with my thumb. She died before the war ended. I never thought I'd see this again. Silas didn't speak. He just stood nearby, quiet as breath. After a long moment, I looked up. I don't know what kind of wife I'll be. He stepped forward, slow and certain. Then, let's find out together. I rose, the photograph still in my hand. I didn't answer with words this time. I reached for him, and he met me there, steady and sure. There was no rush to it. Just the solid, unspoken promise of two people who had nothing left to lose and everything yet to build. And when Silas took my hand in his, he didn't have to ask again. I was already staying. The ground thawed slow that winter, the soil turning soft and dark beneath the last crusts of frost. Silas's hands stayed busy with the fence and mine with sewing, cooking, and keeping Cora and Leo from wandering too far past the edge of the creek where the ice still held in the shadows. We didn't speak of the ring anymore, not because it wasn't on my hand, but because it was quiet and sure, like everything between us. One afternoon, Silas came in with a folded paper from his saddlebag. Post-rider brought this. Came through from Pine Flat. I took it, my fingers stiff from the cold. The envelope was addressed in ink too careful to be casual, the letters narrow and deliberate. I opened it at the table while Silas poured water into the kettle, his back turned just enough to give me room. The letter was from a judge in Prescott. My name was mentioned plainly along with Cora's and Leo's. The children's uncle, a man I'd never met, had filed a claim for custody. He was a clerk in Yavapai County. The letter said he had no wife, no children of his own, but he was kin. I folded the paper once, then again, pressing it flat as if that might make it disappear. Silas set the kettle down and looked at me. Bad news. I didn't answer right away. Their mother's brother. He wants them. Filed with the court. Silas's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. He's never written, never asked after them. I don't even know his name. What do you want to do? I don't know, I said. I don't know what I'm allowed to want. Silas sat across from me, his hands folded. You're their home. That counts more than blood. I looked up, my eyes raw but steady. Then we'll have to prove it. We rode out early the next morning, leaving the children with Mrs. Doran, the goat keeper who had helped Silas before. I had never ridden more than a mile in my life, but I didn't complain as the road stretched long and rutted beneath us, the new snow making the travel slow and treacherous. We reached Prescott on the second evening, the town larger than I remembered. Gas lamps flickered in windows, and the courthouse loomed square and pale against the dusk. Inside, the hearing was swift. The judge seemed tired, his eyes flicking from me to Silas as if trying to read something behind our silence. The uncle was there, stiff in a wool coat too fine for the territory. His words were curt and measured. He said he could give the children structure. He said they needed books and discipline. He never once asked how they were now. When the judge asked me to speak, I stood without hesitation. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. I held their mother's hand when she died. She asked me to look after them. I didn't know if I could, but I did. I still do. The judge studied me for a long moment. You're not kin. No, I said, a fire burning in my chest. But they call me Mama now, and I answer. Silas didn't say much, just nodded when asked if the children had shelter, food, and safety. The judge looked at us both, then at the uncle, then back again. In the end, the ruling was clear. The uncle's claim was waived. The children would remain in my care with Silas as joint guardian by marriage. The paper was signed and sealed. Outside, I leaned against the railing of the courthouse steps, my breath catching in the cold air. It's done. Silas stood beside me, his gloved hand brushing mine. You all right? I nodded. I didn't realize how much I was holding. You've been holding all of us, he said. We rode back slow, stopping once to sleep in a barn where the owner offered us a spot near the hayloft. Silas laid out our bedrolls without speaking of what came next, and I curled beside him beneath the wool blankets, my back to the wind, and my face pressed to his shoulder. I whispered into the dark, I never thought I'd be claimed. Silas's voice came after a long pause. You weren't claimed, you were chosen. When we reached the cabin again, Cora ran to us before the horses had fully stopped, her arms flung wide. Leo stood on the porch with a stick in his hand, and a weary look that melted the moment I knelt and opened my arms. He barreled into me, knocking me back into the snow and laughing. That night, Silas carved a second chair for the table. I hemmed a curtain for the bedroom window. Cora helped shell beans, and Leo built a fort from firewood and old flour sacks. No one spoke of the letter again. It had been burned, the ashes scattered in the stove that warmed us now. Spring came early the next year. The fence held. The goats Mrs. Doran had given us had kids of their own. Silas planted barley. I taught Cora to read from a book I'd salvaged from the wagon. Leo took to carving, using the old compass to mark where the sun crossed the yard each day. On a warm day in late March, Silas brought home a small paint pony, just the right size for a girl of 8. Cora named it Clover. Leo asked if he could sleep in the barn with it. I said no, but with a smile. That night, Silas and I stood at the edge of the porch, our hands laced, watching the children chase fireflies. You ever think we'd get here? I asked. Not once, he said. You glad we did? He turned to me, the lines around his eyes softened. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. I leaned into him, my head against his chest. Then let's stay. And we did. Through seasons and storms, through scraped knees and birthday pies. Through years that stretched wide and full, we built a life not from what we'd lost, but from what we'd found in each other. Quiet, steady, and strong as the land beneath our feet.